Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has sparked a nationwide debate with bold statements on calling for what he calls the repolonization of Poland's economy and an end to naive globalization at the European Forum for New Ideas. Tusk outlined plans to prioritize Polish companies, national interests, and public ownership, aiming to shield the country from global economic challenges. What does this mean for Poland's future economic landscape? How is this compatible with the European single market? Now, to discuss the implications, we're joined now by Tomasz Kasprowicz, Editor-in-Chief, Res Publica Nowa. Thanks so much for joining us here. Good to have you on the program. So let's jump in on this first question. What is the driver behind this?
Well, there are at least two. One is global, one is local. The global one is that we can see how the economy shifts inwards in almost each country. That started very early with the invasion of Russia on the Ukraine, when a lot of countries realized that they depend on other countries and that might be impeding their economic security. And that's why a lot of countries started to try to find out in what way they depend on various countries, especially the ones that are the rival countries. And what they found is that they cannot feel safe. Mm-hmm. And that's why many countries are thinking about changing their logistic chains and made them more secure. So this is what we are seeing right now. And even worse, in recent months, we see that it's not only the problem with the enemies or rivals, it might be a problem with the friends because of what Donald Trump is doing. And such levers of economic coercion can be used in many, many different ways. Mm-hmm. The local answer is, however, that Donald Tusk is a savvy political player, and he knows that for him to keep the power and have a change in the seat of president for his candidate, he needs to take on some right-wing issues and talking points, which he did before, for example, in case of migrants and asylum seekers. So now he's taking the points of more nationalized economy, and this is to lead to starving the opposition of oxygen.
Yeah, interesting point you make there. I want to come back to that, but I think in his whole context here, I'm curious just to share with you and our audience of what Donald Tusk said exactly on how he said it. So let's just share that clip from that speech of Donald Tusk with you now.
Today, Poland, Europe, and the entire world find themselves in a situation where we must state loudly and clearly that we will endure, we will prevail, and we will achieve success for our nation, for our enterprises, for our families, and for our citizens. Those of us who draw the correct conclusions from the events unfolding around us will prosper. And now, I believe, the time has come to say firmly and unambiguously that the era of naive globalization is coming to an end. Make no mistake, if we want to achieve economic success, if we want to build a safe and secure state, Poland cannot afford to be a naive partner, not in a world of increasing ruthlessness and selfishness in global trade, nor on the front lines of war. Polish businesses will no longer compete against multinational giants on an even playing field. I realize this is a very harsh message, but I'm taking it upon myself to deliver it here at the European Forum on New Ideas. My message is clear. The end of the era of naive globalization demands the rebuilding of a national economy. It's time to reshore the Polish economy and capital markets.
Yeah, so there we get the whole breadth of what he said. Interesting point here. He said to correct conclusions will benefit. Now, you mentioned naive globalization a couple of times here. So I'm just curious about that statement here. And an interesting point here, how Poland has benefited very much from being integrated in the single market into the global market. So why this shift? And how do you interpret his words here using naive globalization a couple of times? Who is this targeted at?
Well, let's look at the current state. Of course, Poland is a great beneficiary of globalization. There is no doubt about it. However, we were able as a country to catch up with maybe not the Western Europe, but with, let's say, the least prosperous countries of the Western Europe. And now we have to compete on a slightly higher level in order to advance further. And what we've seen before is the shortcomings of the common market. Because in principle, it seems that in the common market, the playing field is leveled and everybody can compete in this market. But the reality is such that in many countries, or in the most countries, there are ways to privilege own companies. And what Tusk is basically saying is that the same game will be played in Poland right now. Of course, this is a certain problem from the point of view of European Union, because everybody did it, but nobody was saying it out loud. So the question is now whether we are going as a European Union in the direction of, again, erecting barriers between the countries and privileging own companies, or are we going towards the true single market? Let's remember that the project of the single market is largely unfinished, also in terms of services, where Western countries, the old members of United Europe, were shielding their markets from the competition in the service sector, while benefiting largely from open flow of goods. So that might be also the way to look at it. Either we are going all in with the level playing field for everyone, or we'll be going towards more of internalization of the economies and more barriers even within EU.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point there as well. I mean, you mentioned there about the single market not being fully connected yet. I mean, we have the various reports, the Letta report recently. In the last year, we've had also the Draghi report saying other areas of services still need to open up the single market. But still, on this speech as well, how do you interpret this in this way about foreign direct investment, in particular in Poland? Again, large companies, large multinationals investing in Poland. What is this kind of message that he's giving here sent to those companies? And if we're looking at also scale, I mean, if we look at China, the United States, big economies, even Germany, can Poland do that on its own? That's the question here.
Well, there is no doubt that Poland is not big enough to do everything on its own. And that is simply impossible. And I don't think that is what Tusk is saying. What Tusk is saying that the access to certain elements of the market will be on the preferential terms for the Polish companies. Doesn't mean we will not welcome foreign direct investments. We did and we will, and that's never been a problem. The problem might be that certain elements of mostly public spending was mostly colonized by Western or German companies with quite little of that going to the Polish companies. What he's saying now, that should change, and he is pretty clear about, for example, the military spending and the spending for atomic power plant, that it's supposed to go in much bigger part to the Polish companies. And this is also to increase the technology transfer, because if certain amount of services and products needs to go from Polish companies, they need to get the technology from somewhere to be able to provide those goods and services. So this is forcing Western suppliers to also provide the technology transfer, something that we actually were not very good at requiring so far.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, this is also about politics, and we have a presidential election coming up very soon in Poland. Some of the wording here is reminiscent of some of the things that Law and Justice has said in the past as well. Is this also kind of a tip here in terms of politics for trying to gain here a foothold politically in some way? How is this related here with timing?
Yes, this is the second pillar that I mentioned, the internal pillar. Of course, the candidate Rafał Trzaskowski of the Civic Platform is quite firmly in the lead, but this party remembers the case of Bronisław Komorowski that was firmly in the lead for a long time and almost guaranteed to win in the first turn of the election, which didn't happen, and Andrzej Duda actually won those elections. So they are not feeling very secure, and knowing the shift of the public towards the security and economic security in particular, Donald Tusk, as a savvy political player, is trying to pick the points that could be used against Civic Platform and Trzaskowski in the upcoming elections. This is also probably to starve of oxygen the discussion about the recent presidential candidate debate, which was not very favorable to Trzaskowski. Not that he was bad, but the expectations were much higher. Of course, this new narrative will be basically switching the focus of the media and the public from the debate toward this new issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and ultimately, how do you see this moving forward? I mean, looking at how these statements will be turned into policy, what are we looking at here in terms of tangibles in the next months or years ahead?
Well, this is actually a very difficult question, very difficult policy to implement, because it's one thing to say that the Polish companies will be privileged. The second issue is whether those companies will be able to provide needed services and goods. Therefore, we can see probably requirements of some joint ventures or such phrasing of those contracts that will require a higher level of input from Polish companies until the technology transfer is complete, hoping that such technology transfer will happen. And what we can say, this is definitely a long-term project, if will be undertaken for real, because it cannot be done just by flipping a switch. The economy does not react very well to this sort of procedures, as we've seen in US recently. I hope there is some kind of strategy sitting behind those words. We didn't see any concrete plans yet, except for very detailed but very limited ideas around, as I said, military spending, atomic power plant and such. But how this is to be translated into policy, and also policy
and
that
policy,
is not...
On that policy note, I mean, there's much more here to answer. We'll have to finish it, unfortunately, there. But look, Tomasz Kasprowicz, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it for all the insights today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.